Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Tonight we are going to be studying chapter 6 of Tanya, which is the other side. When we say the other side, it means that until now we're speaking primarily about the divine soul. In chapter 3, we're speaking about our intellectual faculties, the Chachma Bin and Das. We also spoke about the emotions that it gives birth to, which is love, awe, compassion, all based on our intellectual understanding about any given topic. It generates an emotion. Chapter 4, we spoke about our soul being garbed, enclosed in livushim, the garments. Everything we do is enclosed either in machshava, dibur, or maisa, which is thought, speech, and action. Anything we do or speak or think about is enclosed in those livushim, in those garments. Hopefully we're using our mouth to speak Torah like we're doing now. Hopefully you're using your hands to light the Shabbat candles or go to a store to buy kosher food. You're using your feet, using your actions, and even your thoughts, your meditations. Hopefully you're meditating about wonderful things. And that's the idea of the levushim that we spoke about in chapter 4. And in chapter 5, we spoke about the Torah, how the ultimate relationship and connection my soul, can have with God is through the study of his Torah. Why is that? Because the Torah and God is one, because he and his wisdom are one, his wisdom referring to the Torah. So when I can tap into the Torah, I'm tapping really into God himself. And thus we explained that when I do the mitzvot, good deeds are the garments of the soul. I'm taking my soul and I'm wrapping myself in beautiful garments. The same way when I go to a wedding, I wear a suit, or the other day I wore a white suit for an unveiling, a nice blue suit with a tie for a wedding. And people can sense what type of mood I'm in and how I'm expressing myself. And I'm using my livushim, my garments. And the Torah is not the garments of the soul, but the Torah is referred to as food for the soul, the food, because the Torah is ingested in me. It is in my blood, it is in my veins. It is within me. And thus I'm completely connected with the Torah and thus with God. This was all on the divine side, on the good side, on the nefesh elokis, the divine soul. But there's something else lurking inside of us, which we call the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, the animalistic soul. And that's what we're going to speak a little bit about tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll do it inside from the text. Okay, so this is the beginning of chapter 6. The Almighty has created one thing opposite the other. So we were speaking the whole time about the divine soul. Everything in the realm of holiness has its counterpart in klipa. In our context, the animal soul with its faculties and garments is the counterpart of the divine soul with its faculties and garments. So just like we explained that my divine soul has these 10 faculties, the 3 intellect and the 7 emotions, opposite of that is the animal soul, which we call the klipa. Klipa is not really a Hebrew term. It's more, I think, Aramaic, if I had to say. And klipa in Hebrew means shell. So an orange has a shell, has a klipa. The klipa is the shell which protects the orange. But the klipa is not something that we typically want to eat. We throw away the klipa, we throw away the shells. Same thing in sunflower seeds or any type of nuts. The shell is something that we disregard. Just as a divine soul consists of 10 holy faculties which correspond to the 10 supernal sphirot, like we explained in chapter 2, and is clothed in those 3 holy garments like we explained in chapter 4, so too the soul of the Sitra Achra, which is defined further in this chapter, is derived from Klipat Noga, which is clothed in man's blood, as explained in chapter 1. Let's just continue reading the text and then we'll unpack this. The animal soul is clothed in the blood and thereby animates the body, this soul too. So this soul too consists of 10 crowns of impurity. So this soul which we call the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, it also has these 10 characteristic traits, the three intellectual characteristic traits, and the 7 emotions. These 10 faculties are 7 evil midot. These are unclean midot, 7 unclean emotional traits. For example, lust, the equivalent in klipa of the midot of chesed, anger, which is expressed by the midot of gvura. Everything has its counterpart, which stem from the 4 evil elements mentioned above. Again, let's just read a little bit more, and then I promise we're going to unpack this. And the intellect, which gives birth to these 7 evil midot, which is subdivided into 3, chachma, bin, and das, which is the source of the midot. Okay, I'm stopping the share, and I'm back to me. Okay, so what does this mean? When we're dealing with the divine soul, intellect reigns supreme. As we explained before, the intellect is the mother and the father, which gives birth to the emotions. So the more I appreciate and understand God and meditate about God, study through prayer or actual study, it gives birth that Mendel Schwartz should act like a mensch and be a nice person. The more I understand God and his Torah, the more of a mensch I should be. And as we explained, that 3rd intellectual character trait called da'as is the application, because you need to apply it for you to give birth to these 7 beautiful emotions of loving God, loving your spouse, loving your children, loving good things. But the reverse, or the opposite of that, is the animal soul, which has the same type of power as the divine soul. So this animal soul also has these 3 characteristic traits called the intellectual characteristic traits and the 7 emotions. But here the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, does a little switcheroo on us. He first mentions the 7 emotional traits before he mentions the 3 intellectual traits. Why is that? Because when you're dealing with the animal soul, an animal soul in definition is intrinsically more instinctive. The animal is in mode of survival. When an animal is in the jungle, whether it's a lion or a lamb or a snake, its apparatus is to survive, to live another day, and to live its beautiful life in the natural habitat, whether it's in the safari in Africa or whether it's right over here on Wilshire Boulevard. That's how animals function. Its primary objective is not to have a relationship with God. Its primary function, its true self, the true animal, is concerned with him or herself to survive, and everything else in its instinctive behavior. So when we talk about the animal soul, we first speak about its emotions, because when you're dealing with an animal, it's constantly working with, I love me, I love myself, I want to survive, or I fear things that are going to suppress me. I need to watch out of the wolf that's lurking behind the trees. That's how animals function. It's about self and survival. And this is not to say a bad thing when you're dealing with an animal. There's nothing evil about an animal trying to survive. That's what animals were born to do. That's why a snake is no more evil or bad than a lamb. The lamb does not have instinctive behavior to kill. The snake does, the lion does, the tiger does. So these animals were born with its animalistic nature, and its emotions reign supreme, which is survival. They love themselves, they fear the enemy. And everything the animal does now to figure out how to capture its prey, it now uses its intellect, its brain, whether it's setting up traps or whether the animal is quietly sneaking and lurking to catch its prey. But everything about the intellect that this animal is using is a offshoot of its emotions. Where in the human being, it's the opposite. In the human being, the emotions is an offshoot of the intellect. That's how human beings are supposed to act. Sometimes human beings act like animals, but the true intellect of truly being objective and doing what's correct and what's intellectually honest, it first sees, what can I do to be correct? And then the emotions are an offshoot of that. There's an interesting story that there were two Hasidim, Reb Zusha of Anapoli and the Rebbe Reb Melech of Lezensk. And these were two great individuals. And before they were famous, which they later became Rebbes themselves, and one of these brothers, Zusha of Anapoli, actually wrote the approbation to the Tanya later in life, to this book that we're reading. He was such a great Rebbe, this man, Reb Zusha of Anapoli. And in their youth, he and his brother, Reb Melech, they went to a certain town to visit. I don't know if they were visiting or they're doing business. It's a little bit unclear for me, the story, but the story is anyways pretty good. And they came to a very nice house, and the owner and these two brothers knocked on the door, and they needed a place to sleep for the night. And this wealthy individual said, there's a special hospitality bread and breakfast, which takes in paupers. It takes in people that don't have a place to sleep and eat, and go there. And that's what they did. 20, 30 years later, Larry and Shu, you guys are okay? 20, 30 years later, hold on a second. I just want to pin myself. Yeah. 20, 30 years later, when they were famous and they came back to that same town, immediately the same wealthy individual told these two brothers, the community town village, the committee anointed me to host you two Rebbes, you two great rabbis. I'm going to host you in my big house. And later in the night, the coachman with its horses came to this wealthy man to sleep tonight. And the wealthy man said, where are the two rabbis? And the coachman said, no, those two rabbis, they asked me to drop them off at this hospitality bed and breakfast, and they decided to stay there the night. So this wealthy man came running to this bread and breakfast to find out what's going on. Why didn't they stay at my house? And the two brothers, Melech and Zusha, tell the wealthy man, well, 30 years ago, you didn't want us. You didn't want to host us. It's 30 years later, and now you want to host us. So we'll allow you to host the part that you want to host. You want to host our fame. You want to host our horses. You want to host our wealth. You want to host your own dignity, so everyone can say that you hosted us. So we let you have our horses and our chariot and the food, and you'll take care of them. But we ourselves, we're those same two people that were here 30 years ago when you didn't want to host us. So those two people are going to continue to stay at the hospitality bed and breakfast. So what's the point here with the story? Is that we have within us two identities. We have the animal soul, which is the idea of making money and survival, which is not intrinsically bad. There's nothing bad of making money. There's nothing bad of survival. There's nothing bad for me to have a second house or a second or a third car. But the real me, the real Mendel Schwartz, is the divine soul. And that divine soul always has a connection and relationship with God. And anytime I'm not doing something, having a relationship with God means I'm using my animal soul. Just like the shell of an orange, we call klipa, the shell, it has a duality. It is protecting the orange so that the orange can be an amazing, luscious orange 2 weeks later, or the shell of an apple. But at the same time, the shell is not intrinsically good. No one wants to eat an orange peel. You want the orange. The orange peel you tend to peel and you throw it in the garbage. It's not intrinsically good. So that's why we call this animal soul that it has klipa. It has this shell mentality, so to speak, this duality to it. So to make it clear, whenever I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm doing good, I'm using my divine soul. And as we explained in the prior chapters, how the divine soul works. And whenever I'm not doing a mitzvah and I'm being animalistic, I'm using my animal soul, my nefesh habahamis. Certainly, if I'm sinning and I'm doing something incorrect, I'm certainly using my animal soul. But what makes the animal soul unique is just like an animal is not intrinsically bad. Like we explained, the animal that kills, the lion that kills is no more bad than a lamb. It's just that the lion and the snake have this instinctive behavior for survival, but it's not per se bad. It's just selfish, let's say, at best. So too, I, Menlo Schwartz, also have this animal soul within me. Certainly when I'm sinning and I'm not behaving, I'm certainly using my animal soul. But what's unique here about the human being is that when there's a gray area, when it's maybe not a sin and it's not a mitzvah, I'm also using my animal soul. Just like the shell or the peel of the orange, the klipa. What's an example of this gray area that I'm talking about? Certainly, if I'm eating a cheeseburger, everyone agrees I'm using my animal soul. If I'm not being nice, I'm using, but what's this gray area? There's a gray area, 50 shades of gray. There's a gray area. The gray area is, let's say I decide to go to the Hollywood Bowl, or I decide to go to the movie theater to see, what's that Tom Cruise movie that was really good the other night? I went with my kids. Top Gun, great movie. Especially on Tuesday night at AMC when it's only $7. It's really good. So yes, Sylvia, I just gave you a little insight there. Now you came to the Tanya class to get your discount at AMC. So when I went to the movie theater, I can't call it a mitzvah. Thou shalt go to the AMC and watch Top Gun. But at the same time, it's not necessarily a sin to go to see Top Gun. It's certainly not a sin to go to see Andrew Bocelli at the Hollywood Bowl like I did a few weeks ago. But can I really call it a mitzvah? If I'm being intellectually honest, I cannot call it a mitzvah. Again, it's not bad. Just like the animals not doing bad. It's living. The animal wants dinner. The snake wants a dinner tonight. The crocodile wants dinner. Menlo Schwartz wants to feed himself with a little Andrew Bocelli or a little Tom Cruise from Top Gun. It's not a mitzvah, but it's not bad. We put that of going to the theaters, the Hollywood Bowl, in the animal soul category. Anything that's not intrinsically having a relationship with God means you automatically disqualify from you ever saying, I'm using my divine soul tonight. You can't say I'm using my divine soul to go to see a movie theater, to go to a movie. If you get into a car and drive to a Yom Kippur service or to a Shabbat dinner, yes, you're using your divine soul. You're doing a mitzvah. But going to a theater, it's not a mitzvah. So it's not the divine soul. And here you have those shades of gray. It may not be a sin. I didn't take my car to go to McDonald's. I just went to AMC movie theater and I had the kosher popcorn. So you put it in the animal soul category. Why? Why the animal soul? Because Menlo Schwartz has an attraction to theater. I like movies, or I like Andrew Bocelli, or I like spending $60 on a steak at a restaurant, which means I'm feeding my animal side within me. I have a pleasure. There's a particular pleasure I get. Some people don't like steak, so fine. Other people like other things, concerts, whatever, Vegas. So I'm feeding the animal within me. Again, it's not evil, for sure not evil. But this is what I'm talking about, how there's a gray area. It's not quite the divine soul. It's not quite bad, but we still put it in the animal soul category, which has thousands of shades of gray, because anything that's not for the divine, we put it with the animal soul. Why with the animal? Because again, anything which is feeding my pleasure, what makes me feel good, we put with the animal soul category. So when I'm using my attraction, I'm saying I love the movie, you can't say I'm using the love of my divine soul anymore. You're automatically saying I'm using the love of the animal soul. Just like the animal, the crocodile likes raw chicken, Menlo Schwartz likes going to the movies. So you're using your animal soul with that. And how do I execute that love of going to the movies? I have to use my intellect. I have to find the keys to my car. I have to make sure I get into the car. I have to put on the engine. I have to drive. I have to make $5. I have to make money to spend money on the movie theaters. So all of that of executing this desire and want to go to that movie theater or to that restaurant to fulfill my food appetite, the emotions and the intellect all falls into the category of the animal soul. And that's why you'll see, I'm not holding there, but you'll see many Hasidic rabbis, or even if they're not Hasidic, and they say, nah, I don't go to restaurants. Why do they say that? They're not allergic to food, but they've trained themselves to be less animalistic and a little bit more refined to feed their animalistic desires and attraction to food or addiction to food or addiction to theater or whatever the case is. Again, it's not bad. Again, this is the gray area that I'm talking about over here. We understand you're using your animal soul when you're eating a cheeseburger. We understand when you're cheating on your spouse or you're physically being abusive, or verbally abusive to somebody. This for sure we're using your animal soul. But even if you're not doing something as evil or as sinful, but something in this gray area, like we gave the examples, you're feeding your animal soul, or your animal soul is executing, is expressing itself. And when you're using your intellect, same thing. So too, when a person steals, let's say I go to a store and I rob someone. This thief has to use intellect. He doesn't want to get caught. And sometimes these thieves are even smarter than honest people. So don't think because someone is doing bad, that means they're not using their seichel. No, they're using their seichel. They're using their intellect. But their intellect is an offshoot of their emotional attraction of that money. And they want that money no matter what, even if they want to claim that money in a dishonest way through thievery. And as a result, they now start to use their intellect and they execute. When you're dealing with the divine soul, the reverse is true. You're first using your intellect, how to be a mensch, how to be honest. These are intellectual characteristic traits you must use. And your emotions is an offshoot of that. Am I making sense here, or am I being a bit esoteric here? If you have any questions, feel free as I sip my LaCroix seltzer.
I do have a,
yeah.
Just you took your children to the movie, and isn't that actually doing a kindness? So wouldn't that, or spending time doing things that may be a little frivolous with your family, it seems like that's sort of a kindness, and that would bring out the love and the divine soul. So I'm just curious about that.
Yes, that's a very good point, Sylvia. And that actually itself can be debated, because sometimes you're not even sure when you're doing an act, is this act a good act? Like you're saying, there's nothing more fatherly than taking your children out to a ball game. You're right. So I guess that also could be up to debate. Is this act self-serving or to quench my addiction or my desires for theater? Or indeed what you're saying is correct. I have a mitzvah to love my spouse and my children, and maybe this is a way to do it. You're right. Some people will say, no, there's other ways how to show affection to your children. Just 100 years ago, there were no movie theaters, and parents also loved their children. So, but you're right. And you're absolutely right. And so perhaps I fall into this latter category because I took my children to the theater, and you're right. And there was a part of me that felt very fatherly and very good. And I put a feather in my cap. I did another wonderful fatherly thing. The same way how I would take my spouse out to a theater or to a restaurant. And then you can even say, Shalom Bayit, it's to improve my marriage. Then certainly. So you're right. So that itself can be a debate sometimes when I'm doing an act. Is the act to be a better father or a better husband? Or did I do it for selfish motives, for self-serving addictions or desires that I have? You're right. You're absolutely right. If you speak to very religious people, they'll say, you could have showed affection to your spouse in a particular way. You don't have to do that, but you're absolutely right. So and you're absolutely right. That is up to debate, and I'm happy you brought that up.
I had a question also.
Sure.
I thought that so it's
You can speak a little louder, Cindy.
it's a mitzvah to be happy, and so on the same point, going off of the going to the movies is an example, or going somewhere for fun, and it's a mitzvah to be happy. So I was thinking that wouldn't that be considered with the divine soul if you're doing something to uplift yourself, especially if someone, for example, has been depressed or very stressed lately, and they're going to do something to make themselves happy. That's a mitzvah. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Somewhat on the lines of Sylvia, what you're saying, very good. So I'll say two things. One, the mitzvah to be happy is Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. You should serve God with joy. That's the mitzvah. So if I'm going to the movies so that I can be a better Jew and I can serve God in a more pleasant way because now I'm in a better mood and a happier mood, then you're right. Maybe it's a mitzvah to go to the movie theater. But if I'm going to the movies just to fulfill a particular want and desire I have, the same way other people want to drink their second 6-pack of Heineken beer because it makes them feel happy. So if that person says, I'm drinking my 8th glass of beer because I'm a better Jew and I'm happier now, and only he will know. I'm not judging that boy or girl. Because some people say 1 beer is nothing. I need 3 beers to be happy or 8 beers to be happy. But either way, Cindy, if the person's drinking that beer and that alcohol, or just alcohol, if people get nervous, let's just say beer, or even Coca-Cola. If I'm drinking that 4th can of Diet Coke, or even the 1st can of Diet Coke, and I'm doing it because, like you say, Cindy, there's a mitzvah to be happy. But again, the mitzvah is to serve God with joy. There's no mitzvah to go to a club and dance for 9 hours and say, but I'm happier now. That's not the mitzvah that God asked us to do. Because some people will say it's a mitzvah to dance maybe with a bunch of ladies at a club, and that also makes me happy. So when you say there's a mitzvah to be happy, that's not quite the mitzvah, because I can go clubbing every night and be happy. The mitzvah is to serve God with happiness. So only you can answer that question. Am I doing the following act, whether it's drinking the Diet Coke or going to the movie, to be a happier Jew and serve God with joy? Then you're right, then it's a mitzvah to go to the movies. And I would put myself into that category. I went to the movies to be a happier dad and to be a happier person. And I went to synagogue the next morning. So then it's okay. Maybe then it's kosher. But if I'm not doing it for that reason, I'm just drinking beer just to be happy, just because I want to be happy, that's no mitzvah. Because then you can stretch the limits to the sky. You can keep on pushing down that goalpost of how happy is happy. And people can do crazy things to be happy today, especially in 2022. So we have to be careful when we say it's a mitzvah to be happy, but you're right. So I have to put an addendum to that statement. It's a mitzvah to serve God with happiness. And again, only you can answer that. Sarah has her things that make her happy. And there's certain things that make her happy as a Jew. There's certain things that make me happy as a father. And there's certain things that make me happy just because I'm happier now. And only I can answer what makes me happy for my selfish happiness. For some people, it's drinking 8 glasses of beer. For some people, it's whatever. And you're right. And that's why every person needs to kind of have their own self-therapy and truly be honest with themselves. And then you can say, you did that act with your divine soul because I want to be a better Jew. Or I did that just because I wanted to be happy. That's why many people do exercise, including myself, because I think I'm a healthier Jew. I'm a healthier father. I'm a healthier husband by going swimming and working on the elliptical. But if you did it for wrong reasons, because I wanted just maybe to look better to get the other guy at the club, or he bet me, whatever the case is, again, I don't want to go down certain examples. So we just have to be, I guess each one to their own. And by the way, the culture, the generations change. Maybe 50 years ago in the shtetl in Poland, or 70 or 100 years ago, they did some weird things those days to be happy as a father. And some people did certain things happy just to, right? They didn't have theater, but they maybe had something else. And they're maybe being, told by their rabbi or their parent, is this true happiness, or you just, whatever it is?
So is what you're saying is the intention behind it is important.
Yes. What are you doing it for? Why does that make you happy? And what are you doing with that happiness? So another example that's brought a little bit later in chapter 6 of Tanya is, when I eat dinner, or if I eat breakfast and you make a blessing over the food, did I eat that breakfast so that I can have energy to work, or energy to study Torah, or energy to pray in synagogue? Then I've elevated that breakfast. But if I ate my breakfast because I want to be gluttonous and just have a nice omelet just for the sake of, because I like an omelet, and I'm not going to study Torah, and I'm not going to pray, and I'm just feeding my gluttonous behavior, whether it's a breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and there is no result out of that, just because I'm for the sake of being gluttonous, even though I'm happy, there's no mitzvah in that. There's no honor in that. You can do it. You may not get a sin. Again, this is the gray area we're talking about. It's not a sin to eat a 5-egg omelet, but the question is, have you elevated your breakfast? Have you elevated your lunch? If you didn't, then you're like an animal in the jungle that's on the prowl looking for its next animal to eat for dinner. There's nothing bad with a tiger when it makes a kill and it eats. There's nothing bad with a crocodile when it catches something in the waters and it eats a dinner. There's no sin in that. But it just means when I operate in that fashion, it just means I'm an animal. Again, when I say animal, I'm using it, I don't mean to call you, God forbid, or anyone here or myself an animal. And by the way, I'm guilty of that many times, where I'm just eating for the sake of eating. It tastes good. It drinks. It's wonderful. There's no sin in that. There's no sin in eating a steak. But the question is, am I doing it to be a better husband, a better father, or to serve God with that food, with that steak, or with that glass of wine? Certainly on Shabbat, where all the eating is automatically elevated as a mitzvah. That was a given from the Talmud. Any food I eat on Shabbat is automatically being elevated for the sanctity of Shabbat. So on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday as well, when I'm eating, what am I eating for? Am I eating just to survive like an animal, or am I doing it to be a better Jew? Like you're saying, to serve God with joy, as long as it's serving God with joy. And if it's not, then you're like an animal. Doesn't make you necessarily, you didn't do anything evil. I'm not calling you a sinner. I'm not calling myself a sinner. It just means you can't say I use my divine soul to go out to a restaurant and eat a $50 steak, unless I did it for shalom bayit, for marital bliss, unless I did it to help for my relationship with my children, or unless I did it to study Torah like I did tonight. I had dinner tonight. I have that energy that I'm having right now, and you have energy listening to me. There's no question that the dinner that you had tonight was elevated. So you're not an animal when you ate that dinner. Your dinner was elevated for something good, of serving God with joy. So automatically you're out of the category of being like an animal. You're doing something high with that dinner, with that lunch. These are extreme, obviously, examples I'm giving you in chapter 6 of Tanya, but I'm just giving you the extreme. Sometimes we're unsure what's the right thing to do, or we're unsure when I'm making a decision, am I using my divine soul? Am I using my animal soul? This can get confusing. For example, when I'm ready to give charity and I don't know where to give the charity to, should I give it for this institution or that institution? And I make a decision. That decision, where was it coming from? What was I using to make this decision? There's an interesting story. I forget which rabbi it was. It's irrelevant who the rabbi's name is, but he owed quite a bit of debt to his employees, different people from his village that needed some money. And typically the rabbi of the town, when people needed some money, $100, they were short on rent, they would go to the rabbi for the $100, $50, $1,000, whatever the case is. This rabbi didn't quite have a lot of money. It happened to be one night when he was visiting, when different students were coming into his office to have these one-on-one encounters with the Rebbe of the town. One wealthy individual gave the rabbi $10,000. The rabbi was very thankful. He blessed this individual. The assistant of the rabbi was beyond thrilled to the gills. $10,000, it was like $10 million, whatever the case is. And then right away, another person after this wealthy man also came in, and he told the rabbi, I'm marrying off my child and I need $10,000 to marry off my child. And the rabbi was unsure over here. Should he give the entire $10,000 that he just received to this one individual who needs to marry off their child? Or should he give the $10,000 to the 500 other people that needed $100 or $200 to help them with the rent, including his employees and things like that? And the rabbi, this rabbi was unsure what to do. What should be the decision? And he wasn't sure if he's going to give the $10,000 to this one individual. Is he using his animal side? Is he using his divine side? Like what? He was just completely confused. He wasn't sure what's the correct decision here. So he told himself he's going to give the full $10,000 to this individual marrying off the child. A few minutes later, when the assistant came in at the end of the night, and he went to the rabbi for the $10,000 to give out to all the employees and to all of the people that needed the money, the rabbi said, I already gave the $10,000 to this individual. The assistant was went nuts on his own rabbi and on the boss. Said, how did you do something like this? So the rabbi said the following. When I received the $10,000 from the wealthy man, the first thing that came to my mind was not to give the $10,000 to all those individuals that needed the money. I was happy I had the $10,000 and I put it to my desk and everyone have a nice day. The moment I decided to give the $10,000 to the person that needed to marry off the child, all of a sudden there was a voice inside of me that said, hold on a minute. Not so quick to give the $10,000 to the one father or mother that needs to marry off a child. There's a lot of other people out there that can use the money. And the rabbi told himself, 20 minutes ago, when I received the $10,000, there was no voice inside of me shouting, give the $10,000 to dozens and dozens of people that needed a small amount of money. There was no voice in me saying, $10,000, now give it out to all your employees, give it to your assistant, give it to the people that are short $100 on rent. There was no voice. Only now when I decided to give $10,000 to the parents of the bride, only now there's a voice inside of me to say, hold on, maybe don't because there's someone else that needs the money. I know that voice is not the correct voice. Because if that was the correct voice, that voice would have opened up its mouth 20 minutes ago when I had the $10,000 initially. Only now when I want to do a mitzvah, there's someone else knocking it down. Then don't give it to the person that means marry off the child. Why am I saying this? It's a very subtle story over here. But when you hear a voice inside of you or within me, all of a sudden it comes up out of nowhere. When you're ready to do something good, you have to question it. Like when I'm ready to go to synagogue and all of a sudden there's a voice inside of me that says, you know what? You didn't work out yesterday. You didn't hit the elliptical yesterday. And you told yourself to be a better Jew and to be a healthier Jew, you need to work out every single day. But the only time I hear that voice is when I'm ready to do a mitzvah and go to synagogue. You have to question that voice. You have to question that opinion. How many times when I go to someone for charity to the Chai Center, all of a sudden they give me 10 reasons why they shouldn't give it because they have other places to give it to. They never said that to themselves yesterday. Only now they say that. Or in spousal behavior or in relationship behavior. You know, someone asked me for my time. All of a sudden there's something else going on. So this is a very tricky balance within us as to when we should exercise certain actions. Is it the divine soul or is it the physical? Is it the animal soul? Again, I'm splitting hairs here with you because just to back up for a moment. When we're doing mitzvahs and when we're studying Torah, for sure I'm using the divine soul. When I'm doing evil or when I'm doing sins, for sure I'm using the animal soul. Then there's this gray area. When I'm having a natural dinner with myself, I'm having a hamburger, which is kosher. Says the Rebbe, says chapter 6 of Tanya, well, I can either elevate this dinner There's food that I need to sustain myself to live and be a better Jew. Like Cindy was saying, I should serve God with joy. And that's how you do it. Have a good dinner, make yourself happy, but make yourself a happier Jew. Or if you don't do that and you're just being gluttonous because it tastes good, then you're actually degrading that dinner. You're bringing that food down. Just like the shell of an orange, you can either use this shell of the orange to upgrade itself. The shell is upgraded when we say this amazing orange peel is amazing because the orange is a better orange. Or you taste the shell, it tastes bad. So now you're degrading your dinner because you didn't do anything Jewish with it, so to speak. So this is a very high calling of chapter 6 of Tanya, which is not even going through the mitzvahs of what we should do, what we shouldn't do. It's simply stating that to use your divine soul means is to have a relationship with God. Even if you're going to spend 6 hours and meditate because you feel better, that's not necessarily a divine act. Just to do something because you feel better is not a divine act. If you feel like you're a better Jew and you have a better relationship with God now, then it's a divine act. And so to the reverse, like we explained with doing natural things like dinners or theaters and things like that. So that's pretty much sums up chapter 6. Another interesting asterisk at the end of chapter 6 is something interesting. What if I eat something that's not kosher, a cheeseburger, but I use it for energy so I can study Torah? Can we elevate something that's not kosher, which is intrinsically a sin? So no one asked that question when you talk about stealing money to give to charity, right? Everyone would agree here that if I steal money from my neighbor so I can go to synagogue and give them $10,000, everyone will say that's a sin, that money is disqualified, no good. When it comes to the cheeseburger, to use it to pray or to use the energy to do something good with, so now it's a little bit tricky. Can we elevate that cheeseburger because now I have energy to do a mitzvah or not? So the Rebbe says you cannot. Anything which is intrinsically sinful, I don't want to use the word evil because we think of evil, we think of a terrorist or murder. So I don't want to call a cheeseburger evil, but it's sinful. For whatever reason, God said a cheeseburger is just as big of a no-no to me as everything else. That is a prohibition. So you cannot. You can do the mitzvah. No one will say, you can't go to synagogue tonight because you had the cheeseburger. No one's going to say that. But don't tell me that you can elevate a sin, elevate a cheeseburger because you're going to go to synagogue afterwards. Eat your cheeseburgers, Eitzig gesund, enjoy yourself. Hopefully you'll do teshuvah, repentance on that or not. But either way, tomorrow's a new day. Go to synagogue, help another Jew, be nice to somebody, and everything else. So that's just the end of it, because this sinful cheeseburger is not like the shell of the peel, the shell of the orange. It is not like the peel of an orange, which we say you can either use it to protect the orange or the peel of an orange is klippa, throw it in the garbage. Like we explained with the kosher hamburger, either I'm going to elevate it or I'm going to degrade it. Either I look at the peel of an orange, which is a protector, or it's garbage. That's all when you're dealing with kosher hamburgers or a kosher movie or a kosher event at the Hollywood Bowl or a kosher restaurant. But when you're dealing with something which is intrinsically sinful, whether it's an intrinsically sinful movie, let's say pornography, or something intrinsically like a cheeseburger, then you can't say, well, I'm doing it to make my life more fun, to be more joyful. This we don't say. This we can never elevate. It's a disqualification. Okay, we'll leave it with that, and I'll open up for any questions if you have any questions.
This is Andre with a question.
Sure.
You talked about gray areas for the animal soul. What kind of gray areas might there be for the divine soul?
Andre, very good question. However, when you're dealing with God, there is no gray area with God. So when you're putting on tefillin, there's no gray area here. When a woman is lighting Shabbat candles, there's no gray area here. When a woman is lighting Shabbat candles, but she's doing it on Shabbat, that's a desecration to the Sabbath. So you can't, that's not a gray area. It's just like a person eating a cheeseburger and saying, but I'm going to use that energy to go and pray now. There's no gray area here. When you're dealing with the divine, divine is intrinsically divine. God is infinitely great. He's infinitely powerful. You don't say God is like a little bit strong. You don't say God is sort of nice. God is God. There's no gray area with God. So there is no such gray area. When a person goes to Yom Kippur service, it's intrinsically good. When a person lights the menorah, it's intrinsically good. There's only one area, it's interesting, Andrea, that you said, there's only one area that the Rebbe in this book of Tanya says when you're dealing with the divine. And I'll give you this example. When a rabbi studies Torah to show off and to tell everyone that he's a great rabbi, that is that gray area perhaps that you could be talking about. Where no longer can we say this rabbi is using the divine soul anymore, but he's actually using his animal soul to make himself wealthier, to make himself stronger, to give himself a better salary. But if you're using Torah for God's purpose, which is to have a relationship with God truly, then that's the function of your divine soul. But if you're indeed going to use God or studying Torah to show off or to say, look at me, how great I am, so maybe that's that gray area what you're talking about, which we also disqualify a person. But I will say, though, the Talmud will tell us if an egocentric maniac rabbi would ask the Bet Din, a court, and he would say, well, should I continue studying Torah? Or I have such an ego and I'm really using it just to show off, perhaps I should stop studying Torah. So to that we say he should still continue to study Torah, even if I know he's going to show off with it. Why? Because the Talmud tells us we hope that when a person studies, even not for the sake of godliness, eventually one day he's going to appreciate the Torah so much that he'll start to study the Torah for the sake of godliness. So who is it for? It's who are we to say such a person shouldn't study Torah? So actually, I'm glad you brought it up, Andrea, because I think that's a very good point. And indeed, the Rabbi of the Tanya says the same thing.
Toda Rabah.
I had a question about the point you were discussing with the thoughts that come into your head. For example, someone's about to give charity, as you were saying, or do something good for someone, and then the thought comes out of nowhere to stop them. And I think that happens a lot, especially a train of thoughts. And it's difficult to understand which is the good thought and which one to listen to and not.
Yeah, that is the balancing act of us humans, is when we have different voices in us and we're really unsure what to do. You know, on a simple level, I'm always unsure when I'm in the flower shop, what color flowers to buy my wife. I always screw it up. So that's an easier issue to deal with. But some people also want to know what school to send their kids to. There's a lot of shades out there of conservative schools or Orthodox schools, and different schools have different thrusts, whether it's social justice or Israel or things like that. So it can get very tricky, and that's the art and the balance of us humans try to figure out what's really best for us. Generally speaking, we have a Torah, we have a guide, which I call the Constitution of Judaism. And most things can be found in that Constitution, in that Torah, to help us, guide us, and to make those decisions. And sometimes when we're unsure, we can either open a book and see what does the Torah have to tell us. The Talmud has 63 volumes, and there's something called Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. And if we're unsure how to read it, because I certainly don't know all 63 volumes, I also go to a rabbi and I ask, what does Torah have to say about that particular subject matter? And we help ourselves get advice from other people as well when we're unsure. There's no crime in asking advice. I'm a rabbi many years now, and I still have basically two rabbis I bounce things off when I'm unsure. And I would say at least every 2 weeks, I'm asking a rabbi a question. So there's no crime in that.
What
Thanks
about
for-
the subject of like dating and shomer negia, and where does that fall in line with the?
So I think I think every person's sin is unique. I think everyone is different. And I think that everyone has to find their rabbi or their woman rabbi and guide who they can go to and help them navigate that. Okay, give me 1 second, guys. Hello?